When you look up in the night sky, to the night sky, and you feel awe, there's a call there. It's part of that experience to imitate that great thing that you perceive. Now you might say, well, how can you imitate the infinite cosmos as well? Obviously, that's a very complicated question, but you know, you're a very complicated thing. And God only knows what it means for you to imitate the infinite when you apprehend it. I mean, that's, in some sense, that's the fundamental question of life, is how do we adapt ourselves to the infinite complexity that surrounds us? What must we become? Well, you don't merely think that through. And I mean, you don't, I don't, human beings in general don't. We puzzle it out, and we use all sorts of information to do that. And some of these more primordial experiences that are outside the domain of strict rationality nonetheless point us in an ethical direction. And the ethic would be, you should and could be more than you are. Well, then the question is, how do you bring that to earth? How does that look when you try to embody it day to day? Mm-hmm. Well, I would say these are obviously not my ideas. They're very old ideas. Well, maybe you ally yourself with truth to the degree that you can. Maybe you pursue beauty. Maybe you pursue the love that attaches you appropriately to other people, etc., etc. And so, and you do that because, well, I think you do it because life is very, very difficult. I was talking to my wife the other day, and she's become very interested in Christianity, and she was talking about a set of mysteries that are part of the Catholic ritual, and one of the mysteries is Christ's bearing of his cross, and someone helps him. And this isn't I'm not speaking about this religiously. I'm speaking about it practically and psychologically. It's a remarkable story because it implies that human existence, like our subjugation to vulnerability, which is exemplified in that story, to be rejected by the crowd, to be betrayed, to be killed, that subjugation is so difficult that even God himself needed help. Mm-hmm. And so the question is that, and like I said, I'm not speaking religiously. I'm looking at the story in some sense as a psychologist. It's like, what does that imply? Well, it implies you have to call on you have to note when you're being called to be more than you are, and you have to attend to that very carefully because life is extraordinarily difficult, and to manage it in a manner that makes it acceptable, or perhaps more than acceptable, you have to be everything you could be. So that's not exactly strength, right? It's way more than that. Strength is a way into it. It's a specific virtue. It's a way into the discussion of what constitutes the ideal. So started doing what I'm doing back in, say, probably 1985, because I realized that one of the pathways to totalitarian catastrophe was deceit at the individual level. This is something that Solzhenitsyn made very much of, Orwell as well, Huxley as well. These great thinkers concluded in the aftermath of these totalitarian catastrophes that there was an integral link between pathology at the individual level, which was fundamentally the willingness to use deceit in an instrumental manner. I'll lie to you to get what I want, and authoritarian catastrophe, and that it was a direct causal link. And I actually buy that argument. I think that's literally true. And so partly what I'm doing, I hope, is helping people walk through thinking about why telling the truth is a good idea. Not only for them, not as a top-down, shake your finger moral injunction, don't lie, you shouldn't lie, but in a detailed manner to explain the relationship between the instrumental use of deceit and the collapse of civilizations. And that connection is way closer than people think. You know, so one person influences 1,000 people, for sure, in their lifetime, and sometimes a lot more than that. And 1,000, the next rung out from that, 1,000 times 1,000 is 1,000,000, and the next rung out from that is 1,000,000,000. And so you're always at the center of a concentric circle that 2 rungs out contains 1,000,000,000 people. Mm-hmm. Well, it turns out that what you do matters. And basically what I'm doing, I hope, is touring and talking to people face-to-face in these lectures, for example, and making the case that it's a terrifying case. Everyone says, well, we want meaning in our life. Do you now? Do you now? Because you might ask yourself, what's the more threatening possibility? That nothing you do matters, which means you can pretty much do whatever you want. That's the upside of that nihilistic claim, no responsibility, right? And why not pursue narrow-focused hedonism, since nothing matters anyways? So that's the shadow of nihilism. Or everything you do matters. And it's a lot more terrifying to contemplate that, is that you will be held accountable for everything you do. And I believe that firmly, partly as a consequence of my clinical experience. I never saw any one of my clinical clients ever get away with anything, even once. And you think, well, people get away with things all the time. It's like, no, they don't. They might gain a narrow advantage in one dimension in the short term. But, let's say that you use deceit in your business practices. First of all, that doesn't work very well because people will figure you out. So as a long-term strategy, it's terrible. Yep. It just doesn't work. Yep. No one is going to play with you if you're a cheat. But let's say that someone asked me the other day, well, what about these dictators that ruled their whole life, and they were at the top of the hierarchy, let's say, and they had all the power. Stalin's a perfectly good example. It's like, didn't he win? Well, everyone Stalin ever talked to lied to him because they were absolutely bloody terrified of him. His country was a nightmare. It was hell, or as close as we've been able to produce, with the possible exception of the Nazis and the Maoists, but it was up there in terms of hell. And did he rule? Yes, but he ruled hell. And if you think that's a victory, well, go ahead and try it and see how much of a victory it is. Milton Satan said, I'd rather rule in hell than serve in heaven. It's like, fair enough, go ahead. Use deceit, use instrumentality, rule in hell. You'll be the ruler. See how much good it does you. See where that takes you. It takes you somewhere terrible. Physical attractiveness is extensively studied in departments of psychology. How big of a determinant of success is it apart from IQ or any of the other big 5 traits? That's tough one, because physical attractiveness is a very complex trait. It's also, for example, it's a marker of health. And of course, health is a prerequisite for success. So we know that people who are physically attractive, though, are given the benefit of doubt by other people. They benefit from the positive halo effect. And the positive halo effect is the propensity of people to assume good things about someone if there is one outstanding thing about them that's easily evident, that's good. And so if you stand up straight with your shoulders back, so that's rule 1 in 12 rules for life, then people are going to see you as more attractive. If you're symmetrical, you're more attractive. If you're thin but not too thin, you're more attractive. And then there's like good skin and good teeth and good hair and all of those things in proper proportions and youth. And there's a whole slew of things that feed into that. If you are characterized by a plethora of those features, then people are also going to assume that you're more competent and more worth having around, let's say. But the problem is that you are. So separating out the attractiveness from the things the attractiveness is correlated with is very hard. That's why you have to do multivariate analysis. That's multivariable analysis in any complex social science, because a lot of these traits overlap. So, but you can there's some things you can do about that. Postural adjustment is helpful. To work out with weights, that's extraordinarily helpful. That improves your posture and makes you more confident, and you can dress reasonably well and intelligently, and all of those things to help yourself capitalize on whatever attractiveness you can muster. So Zazu, the eyes of the king, comes to check out the king, and that's Mufasa. Yeah, and he's a very regal-looking person. lion, and he stands up straight and tall, and that means that he's high in serotonin, because serotonin governs postural flexion. And if you're dominant and near the top of hierarchies, you tend to expand so that you look bigger than you could if you shrunk down. And so if you're a low dominant person, you wander around like this so that you look small and weak, and you don't pose a threat to anybody. But if you're at the top, you expand yourself so that you can command the space. And that's why he has that particular kind of regal posture. And if you look at his facial expression, you see that it's quite severe. He's capable of kindness, but he's also harsh and judgmental. And that's what society is like. That's what the superego is like. And what that means is that he's integrated his aggression. And I've seen this happen in my clinical clients when they come in and they're too agreeable. They look like Simba looks later in the movie when he's an adolescent, and he's sort of like a deer in the headlights. Everything is coming in and nothing is coming out. But when the person integrates their shadow and gets the aggressive part of themselves integrated into their personality, their faces harden. And if you look at people, you can tell, because the people who are too agreeable look childlike and innocent, and the people who, well, a hyper-aggressive person will look, mean and cruel. But I've seen people's face change in the course of therapy. Men and women. And what happens is they start to look more mature, and it's more like they're judging the world as well as interacting with it properly once they integrate that more disagreeable part of it. It's very, very necessary, and that's part of the incorporation of the Jungian shadow.